Jonathan Hale slammed on the brakes hard enough that his driver's coffee spilled across the passenger seat divider. "Sir," Walter started. "Pull over," Jonathan said. "Now." The black sedan eased onto the shoulder of Crest Hill Avenue, a quiet residential street on the edge of a neighborhood that Hale Development Group had spent the last 18 months acquiring, parcel by parcel, for a mixed-use high-rise project that would, by every metric his board cared about, transform this entire block into something worth 4 times its current value. Jonathan did not look at his phone. He did not look at the demolition schedule sitting open on the tablet in his lap. He looked out the window at a woman in a faded blue coat, dragging a queen-size mattress down the cracked sidewalk by herself, one corner of it scraping against the concrete every few feet. She could not have been more than 30. Her hair was pulled back in a hasty knot. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, walked beside her carrying a backpack that looked too heavy for her, a stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. The woman stopped every 20 feet to readjust her grip, breathing hard, her knuckles white where she gripped the mattress edge. "Sir, do you want me to call someone? Maintenance or—" "No," Jonathan said. He was already opening the door. "Stay here." He crossed the street at a pace that surprised even him. He was 52 years old, in good shape for his age, but he could not remember the last time he had moved with this kind of urgency that was not connected to a deal closing or a board meeting running long. He reached the woman just as she stopped again, setting the mattress down on the sidewalk, breathing hard, one hand pressed to her lower back. "Let me help you with that," he said. She turned, startled, immediately pulling her daughter slightly behind her with one arm. Her eyes moved over him quickly, the tailored navy suit, the watch that cost more than most people's cars, the black sedan idling across the street. "We're fine," she said. Her voice had the careful flatness of someone who had learned to say that sentence regardless of whether it was true. "It's heavy," Jonathan said. "I have 2 hands and nothing else to do with them right now." I said we're fine. She bent to pick up the mattress again, and this time her grip slipped and the whole thing sagged sideways into the gutter. She made a small sound of frustration, not quite a sob, and crouched down to pull it back up. Jonathan crouched beside her without asking and got his hands under the opposite end. "I'm not trying to bother you," he said. "I just don't think you should be doing this alone." She looked at him for a long moment. Up close she looked exhausted in the specific way that goes past tiredness and into something structural, exhaustion that had become the baseline rather than the exception. "Why do you care?" she said. It wasn't hostile. It was genuinely a question. "I don't know yet," Jonathan said honestly. "Where are you taking this?" She hesitated. Then she pointed down the block, toward a small brick house at the end of the street, its windows boarded, its front yard overgrown with weeds that had not been cut in over a year. A faded real estate sign, half collapsed, leaned against the porch railing. A second sign, newer, bright orange, was staked into the lawn near the sidewalk, property of Hale Development Group, scheduled for demolition. Jonathan went completely still. "That house," he said. "It's empty," the woman said quickly, misreading his stillness as concern about trespassing. "I know it's not supposed to be. I saw the sign, but we didn't have anywhere else, and the back door doesn't lock, and I figure nobody was using it, and I just need a few weeks, maybe a month, until I can get back on my feet, and then we'll be gone. I promise we won't damage anything." "It's okay," Jonathan said. His voice had gone strange, even to his own ears. "It's okay. You're not in trouble." He was looking past her now at the house. At the porch steps, the third one from the bottom, still missing the corner piece that had broken off when he was 9 years old and his father had never gotten around to fixing it. At the oak tree in the side yard, taller now, much taller, but unmistakably the same tree he had climbed every summer until he was 12. At the kitchen window on the left side, the one his mother used to stand at every evening, watching the street, waiting for a car that did not come home as often as it should have. He had not been inside that house in 31 years. He had specifically structured the entire Crest Hill Avenue acquisition so that he would not have to see it up close, signing off on the parcel through layers of paperwork and project managers, never once walking the site himself, even though he walked every other site in his portfolio, personally. He had told himself it didn't matter. He had told himself a building was a building. "Sir." The woman was looking at him now with concern instead of suspicion. Are you okay? Jonathan realized he had been crouched there, frozen, holding his end of the mattress for nearly 30 seconds without speaking. I'm fine, he said. He stood up slowly, still holding his side of the mattress. What's your name? Sarah, she said, cautious again. Sarah Mitchell. This is my daughter, Lily. The little girl, who had been watching from the sidewalk clutching her stuffed rabbit, gave a small wave that was somehow both shy and brave at the same time. Hi, she said. Hi, Lily, Jonathan said. Something in his chest had cracked open in a way he did not have time to examine yet. I'm Jonathan. Are you going to help us carry the mattress? Lily asked, with the directness only children manage. Mommy's tired. Lily, Sarah said. It's fine, Jonathan said. He looked at Sarah. Let me help you carry this inside. And then I think we should talk. Sarah's jaw tightened. I don't need charity. This isn't charity, Jonathan said. This is the house I grew up in. Sarah stared at him. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Down the street, Walter had gotten out of the car and was standing beside it, watching, not approaching, the way a man watches something he does not yet understand, but knows he should not interrupt. You're lying, Sarah said finally. It was not really an accusation. It was the sound of someone trying to find solid ground in a conversation that had stopped making sense. I'm not, Jonathan said quietly. That's my mother's kitchen window. That's the step my father never fixed. I haven't been inside in 31 years. He looked at the orange sign staked in the overgrown lawn. And as of next Tuesday, my own company is supposed to tear it down. Sarah looked at the demolition sign and then back at him, and something in her expression shifted from suspicion into something more complicated. You're the developer, she said slowly. The one buying up the whole street. Yes. You're going to tear down your own childhood home. I didn't think of it that way, Jonathan said, and the admission cost him something to say out loud, standing on a cracked sidewalk holding the end of a mattress. I thought of it as parcel 14 of a 22-parcel acquisition. I never came to see it. I told my team I had other priorities. That's convenient, Sarah said, and there was an edge in it now. The protective edge of someone who had just watched a wealthy stranger discover sentiment about a building while she was the one trying to live in it. Jonathan didn't flinch from it. You're right to say that, he said. It is convenient. It's exactly the kind of distance people like me build, so we don't have to feel the cost of what we do for a living. He set his end of the mattress down gently on the grass. Can we go inside? I'd like to see it. And I'd like to understand how you ended up here. Sarah hesitated, glancing at her daughter, then back at the house, then at the black sedan still idling across the street with Walter standing beside it. You're really not going to call the police? No, Jonathan said. I'm not going to call the police. She studied him for another long moment. The particular assessment of someone who has been let down by enough people that trust does not come cheap anymore. Then she nodded once, picked her end of the mattress back up, and they carried it together up the cracked front steps, the third one still broken, exactly as he remembered, through a door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges, and into the house Jonathan Hale had not entered in 31 years. The smell hit him first. Old wood, dust, the particular mustiness of a closed building, and underneath it something that should have been gone decades ago, but wasn't, the faint ghost of his mother's cooking, embedded somehow in the plaster, refusing to leave. The front room was bare except for 2 sleeping bags folded in the corner and a small camping stove. Sarah had clearly been here longer than a few days. How long? Jonathan asked quietly. 6 weeks, Sarah admitted, setting her end of the mattress down against the wall. We got evicted from our apartment in March. My ex stopped paying child support 8 months ago, and I lost my job at the warehouse when they cut the overnight shift. I tried 2 shelters, but the one near Lily's school was full, and the other one had a 6-week wait list, and I couldn't, her voice caught. I couldn't put her through changing schools on top of everything else. So I found this place. I check every morning that nobody's coming. I keep everything packed in case we have to leave fast. Lily had wandered to the staircase and was looking up it with the curious caution of a child, exploring a building she had been told to be quiet in. Can I go look upstairs? She asked. Stay where I can see you, Sarah said automatically, and Lily nodded and climbed 2 steps and sat down, apparently satisfied with that compromise. Jonathan walked slowly into what had been the living room. The fireplace was still there, bricked and cold. The mantel his father had built one summer when Jonathan was 7, slightly crooked because his father had never been much of a carpenter, but had insisted on doing it himself anyway. He ran his fingers along the edge of it. My father built this, he said. It took him 3 weekends. My mother said it was the ugliest mantel she'd ever seen, and she loved it anyway because he made it with his own hands instead of buying one. He turned to look at Sarah. He died when I was 11. Heart attack at work. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep this house after that. Cleaning offices at night, working the register at a grocery store during the day. She used to fall asleep at the kitchen table some nights still in her uniform. Sarah was watching him now with an expression that had softened slightly, the wariness still present but no longer dominant. What happened to her? She lost the house when I was 21, Jonathan said. I was in business school. I didn't know how bad it had gotten because she never told me she didn't want to distract me from my studies, she said. By the time I found out, the bank had already foreclosed. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment across town and never told anyone how close we'd come to actually being homeless that final year. The year she was sick on top of everything else. The year I was 300 miles away building spreadsheets in a classroom. His voice had gone rough. I built this entire company so that would never happen to anyone in my family again. And somewhere along the way I forgot why I started. The room was quiet except for the sound of Lily's feet shifting on the staircase above them. I'm sorry, Sarah said, and it sounded genuine despite everything. That's a hard thing to carry. It's nothing compared to what you're carrying right now, Jonathan said. You have a 6-year-old sleeping in an abandoned house with a camping stove because the system that's supposed to catch people like you has more holes than floor. He looked at her directly. I have spent the last 20 years building buildings that the people who actually need them can't afford to live in. I tell myself it's about revitalizing neighborhoods. I tell my board it's about maximizing return on undervalued parcels. I have never once, until 30 minutes ago, stood on a sidewalk and watched what happens to the people who get pushed out when that revitalization arrives. Sarah didn't say anything. She was looking at him the way you look at someone who is in the middle of an argument with themselves that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with you at the same time. I need to make some calls, Jonathan said finally. And I need you to not pack that mattress back up tonight. Jonathan stepped out onto the porch and called Bradley Coleman, his chief operating officer, while Sarah stood in the doorway watching him with her arms crossed, still not fully trusting that any of this was real. Jonathan, Bradley answered on the second ring, brisk as always. Please tell me you're calling about the Crest Hill timeline, because the demolition crew needs final sign-off by end of day tomorrow to hit Tuesday. I need you to pull Parcel 14 off the demolition schedule, Jonathan said. There was a pause. Parcel 14. The corner lot. The brick house at the end of the block. Jonathan, that's the anchor parcel. The entire site plan is built around clearing that lot for the southern entrance. If we pull it, we're talking weeks of redesign, maybe months, and the investors are already asking why we're behind on this project compared to the timeline we presented in March. I understand that, Jonathan said. Pull it anyway. Can I ask why? Bradley's voice had the careful tone of a man who had worked for Jonathan for 11 years and knew exactly when to push and when not to, and was currently trying to figure out which situation this was. Jonathan looked back through the doorway at Sarah, who was crouched now talking quietly to Lily on the stairs. Because I grew up in that house, he said, and there's a family living in it right now who needs more help than a demolition crew is going to give them. The silence on the other end of the line stretched longer this time. Jonathan, Bradley said carefully, I didn't know that was your childhood home. I'm sorry, but I need you to understand what pulling that parcel actually means. We have committed contracts with the demolition crew. We have a financing structure with the bank that assumes site clearance by end of month. We have a board that is already nervous about cost overruns on this project. If we stop now on a sentimental basis, with no clear plan for how we restructure the project around it, then we restructure, Jonathan said. That's easy to say standing on a porch, Bradley said, and there was an edge of real frustration in it now. The frustration of a man who managed the operational consequences of decisions other people made emotionally. It is not easy to do. We have $240 million committed to this project. We have 11 other investors who are going to want an explanation for why their returns are getting delayed, because the developer found out he has feelings about a house. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. He had known Bradley long enough to know that the bluntness wasn't cruelty, it was honesty, the kind Jonathan had specifically hired him for, the kind that had made Hale Development Group one of the most disciplined operations in the industry. But standing on this porch, looking back through the door at a 6-year-old girl sitting on stairs in a house with no electricity, the discipline felt like exactly the wrong word for what mattered right now. Bradley, Jonathan said slowly, how many families have we displaced building this company? That's not a fair question. It's the only question, Jonathan said. How many? Bradley exhaled audibly. I don't have an exact number. Across every project, over 20 years. Hundreds, probably. That's the nature of the business, Jonathan. You buy distressed properties, you redevelop them, property values rise. The people who could afford the old version often can't afford the new version. That's not a flaw in the model. That's the model. You've always understood that. You built your entire career on understanding that and not letting it slow you down. I know, Jonathan said quietly. I built my entire career not looking at it too closely. And today I looked at it. He paused. There's a woman in this house right now, Bradley, with a 6-year-old daughter who got evicted because her ex stopped paying support and she lost her job. And she has been sleeping on a mattress on the floor of my mother's old kitchen because every shelter in this city is full or has a 6-week wait list. She is exactly the kind of person our revitalization model is supposed to be helping, and instead we were 2 days from bulldozing the only roof she had left. There was a long pause. I hear you, Bradley said finally, his voice softer now. I do. But I need you to think about what you're actually proposing, because pulling one parcel doesn't solve her problem. It delays it. The project still happens eventually. The house still comes down eventually, just not Tuesday. What are you actually trying to do here? It was a fair question, and Jonathan did not have a complete answer yet, which frustrated him more than Bradley's resistance did. He looked back through the doorway again. Sarah had come to stand near him, listening to his half of the conversation with an unreadable expression. Give me 48 hours, Jonathan said. Pull the demolition order for 48 hours. I'll have a plan by then. 48 hours, Bradley repeated. And if you don't have a plan, then we figure out the next 48 hours after that, Jonathan said. I'm not bulldozing this family's roof over their heads while I go figure out my feelings on a spreadsheet, Bradley. Pull the order. Another pause, longer this time, and then Bradley said, with the particular resignation of a man who had decided 11 years ago that working for Jonathan Hale meant occasionally watching him do something that made no financial sense and trusting that it would eventually make a different kind of sense. Okay, he said. I'll pull it. But Jonathan, the board meeting is Thursday. You're going to need to explain this to people who do not care about your childhood home. I know, Jonathan said. I'll be ready. He ended the call and turned back to Sarah, who had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand the shape of it, even without hearing Bradley's side. You stopped it, she said. There was something raw in her voice, somewhere between disbelief and a hope she was visibly trying not to feel too much of, the particular caution of someone who had been disappointed enough times to distrust good news on arrival. For 48 hours, Jonathan said. I need to figure out what happens after that. And I need your help to figure it out properly, because I am not going to make decisions about your life without asking you what you actually need. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time since he had crossed the street to help her carry a mattress, her eyes filled with something that was not suspicion at all. What I actually need, Sarah said slowly, sitting down on the bottom porch step because her legs seemed to have decided the conversation required it, is something nobody has been able to give me in 8 months. A place that's actually mine, even temporarily. A job that doesn't get cut the second the warehouse has a slow quarter. Someone to watch Lily for 3 hours, so I can go to an interview without paying a babysitter I can't afford. She laughed, short and without humor. I need about 6 things at once, and every system I've gone to only offers one of them, and usually with a wait list. Jonathan sat down on the step beside her, close enough to talk quietly, but not so close it felt presumptuous. Tell me about the warehouse job, he said. Overnight stocking. Distribution center off Route 9, Sarah said. Paid okay. Benefits after 90 days. Which I never made it to, because they cut the night shift in February before my 90 days were up. I'd been there for months. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. Before that I did 2 years at a daycare, but the pay was nothing and I couldn't afford daycare myself for Lily on a daycare salary, which is its own joke nobody seems to find funny except me. What did you study? Before all this? Early childhood education, Sarah said. I was 3 semesters from a degree when I got pregnant with Lily. Her father said he'd help with school while I finished. He didn't. She shrugged. The kind of shrug that had absorbed a lot of disappointment and learned to carry it without visibly buckling. I've been meaning to go back. There's never enough money or enough hours in the day at the same time. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, looking out at the overgrown front yard, the oak tree, the broken third step beneath his shoes. My mother wanted to go back to school too, he said. After my father died. She'd talk about it sometimes, late at night, when she thought I was asleep. She wanted to get a certification in bookkeeping, something that would let her get off her feet during the day instead of cleaning offices at night. She never did it. There was never enough money or enough hours, same as you. By the time I had enough money to help her do it, she'd already lost the house and decided she was too old and too tired to start over. His voice tightened. She died 4 years after I sold my first company. I had more money by then than I knew what to do with, and the one thing she actually wanted, a little room to breathe, a little time to become something other than exhausted, I never gave her because I assumed there'd be time later. There's a particular kind of regret that doesn't go away just because you build something successful afterward. It just moves into a different room of the house and waits. Sarah looked at him, and something in her face had shifted from wariness into something closer to recognition. The specific recognition of 2 people who had each, in different ways, been failed by timing and money and the gap between intention and action. I'm sorry about your mom, she said. I'm sorry about your 8 months, Jonathan said. Both of those things can be true at the same time. I'm not trying to make this about me. It's a little bit about you, Sarah said, and there was the faintest trace of dry humor in it now, the first he'd heard from her. You did just stop a $240 million demolition because you found us standing in your dead mother's kitchen. Fair, Jonathan said, and for the first time since he'd crossed the street, he almost smiled. Lily had come out onto the porch at some point during the conversation and was sitting on the step below them, hugging her stuffed rabbit, listening with the particular quiet attentiveness children have when they sense the adults around them are discussing something important even if they don't follow every word. Are we going to have to leave again? She asked, looking up at her mother. Sarah's face did something complicated. The effort of staying calm for her daughter's sake colliding visibly with whatever she actually felt. I don't know yet, baby, she said. We're talking about it. Jonathan looked at the little girl, at the stuffed rabbit she had clearly carried through every move of the last 8 months, at the particular bravery of a 6-year-old who had learned to ask, are we leaving again, instead of can we stay, because the second question had apparently stopped feeling safe to ask. Something settled in him with the weight of a decision he hadn't fully articulated yet, but had already made. Lily, he said gently, I don't know exactly what's going to happen yet, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you and your mom have somewhere safe to be. Okay. Lily studied him with the serious skepticism children develop quickly when adults have made similar promises before and not kept them. Pinky promise, she said, holding up one small finger. Jonathan looked at the finger for a moment. Then he held up his own and hooked it around hers. Pinky promise, he said. Sarah watched the exchange with an expression that had gone somewhere past wariness entirely now, into something raw. The look of someone watching a stranger keep a kind of promise she had stopped expecting from anyone. I need to go back to my office, Jonathan said, standing up. I have 48 hours and a lot of phone calls to make. I'm going to set you up at a hotel tonight, a real one, with a real bed, not the one across the street idling with my driver in it. And tomorrow I want to sit down with you properly and figure out what a real plan looks like. Not charity, a plan. With a job and stability and something that doesn't disappear in 3 months when somebody's quarterly numbers don't look right. Sarah stood too, slowly, like she was testing whether the ground underneath this conversation was actually solid enough to hold weight. Why are you doing this? She said again. The same question from the sidewalk, except this time it didn't sound suspicious. It sounded like she genuinely needed the answer. Because 31 years ago, Jonathan said, I was a kid in this house watching my mother fall asleep at that kitchen table in her work uniform, and nobody crossed the street to help her carry anything. I built a company powerful enough to make sure that never happened to my family again, and somewhere along the way I forgot it was supposed to mean something bigger than my family. He looked at the house behind them. You reminded me. That's why. The boardroom on the 38th floor of Hale Tower was full by 9 on Thursday morning. 11 investors and 3 board members seated around a table that had seen 100 decisions made on spreadsheets and almost none made on anything resembling sentiment. Bradley sat near the head of the table beside Jonathan, a folder of revised numbers in front of him, the expression of a man who had spent 2 sleepless nights trying to make an emotional decision look financially defensible. Before we start, Jonathan said, standing instead of sitting, I want to tell you about a house. Richard Voss, the largest single investor in the Crest Hill project and a man who had never once in 11 years let Jonathan finish a sentence without interrupting if he disagreed with the direction it was heading, leaned back in his chair with visible impatience. Jonathan, we're $240 million into this project and 3 days behind schedule. Whatever the story is, can it wait until after we settle the timeline? No, Jonathan said simply, because the house is the timeline. He told them. All of it, the mattress on the sidewalk, the broken 3rd step, his mother at the kitchen table in her work uniform, Sarah and Lily sleeping on the floor of a house slated for demolition in 2 days, the pinky promise on the porch. He did not soften it for the room, and he did not perform it either. He told it the way a man tells something true when he has finally stopped editing himself for an audience. The room was quiet when he finished. Richard Voss broke the silence first, predictably. That's a moving story, Jonathan, genuinely. But I didn't invest $240 million in a moving story. I invested in a mixed-use development with projected returns of 14% over 5 years. Sentiment doesn't show up on a balance sheet. It's about to, Jonathan said. He nodded to Bradley, who opened the folder and began passing revised proposal documents down the table. What you're looking at, Jonathan said, is a restructured site plan. We keep the southern entrance design. We keep 90% of the original project scope. What changes is parcel 14. Instead of demolition, we renovate the existing structure and convert it into a transitional housing facility, 6 units, attached to a workforce development partnership with the community college 2 blocks over. Families get up to 12 months of stable housing while completing job training or finishing degree programs. We staff it with a property manager position and a part-time childcare coordinator, both filled internally to start. He paused. The cost is approximately $3.1 million, which is less than 2% of total project budget, and it converts a demolition liability into a community amenity that becomes part of our marketing story for the entire development. We are not the company that bulldozed a neighborhood. We're the company that revitalized it without erasing the people who used to live there. Richard Voss studied the document for a long moment. And the long-term liability of operating a housing facility? That's not our business model, Jonathan. We build, we sell, we move to the next site. The facility operates under a separate nonprofit structure, Bradley said. Finding his footing now, the operational discipline Jonathan had hired him for finally aligning with something he could defend on its own terms. Hale Development funds initial construction and a 5-year operating endowment. After that, it's self-sustaining through partnership grants and the college's existing workforce funding streams. We're not running a shelter long-term. We're seeding something that becomes independent. And the PR value, another board member added, scanning the document, is not nothing. Every major outlet covering this project so far has run some version of the same headline. Luxury development displaces working families. This flips that story entirely. Richard Voss was quiet for a long moment, turning the pages slowly. Jonathan watched him the way he had learned to watch every difficult negotiation in 20 years of building this company, and waited. 3.1 million, Voss said finally, against 240. Fine. I'm not going to be the investor who voted against helping a single mother, because I was protective of 2% of a project margin. But Jonathan, he looked up, and there was something almost like respect in it now, grudging but real. Next time you want to restructure a $250 million project on a Thursday morning, give me more than 72 hours notice. Understood, Jonathan said. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. He drove to the hotel himself that evening instead of sending Walter, because some things felt like they should not be delegated. Sarah opened the door to the room with Lily peering around her legs, and when Jonathan told them what the board had approved, the renovation, the housing program, the job, the child care coordinator position that came with training and a real salary, and benefits that started immediately instead of after some arbitrary waiting period nobody survived long enough to reach. Sarah sat down slowly on the edge of the hotel bed and put both hands over her face. "Are you okay?" Jonathan asked, suddenly uncertain. The way people get uncertain around emotion they cannot immediately categorize. "I'm okay," Sarah said, her voice thick. She lowered her hands. Her eyes were wet, but she was almost laughing. The specific disoriented relief of someone whose nervous system had been braced for disaster for so long it didn't quite know how to process the absence of one. "I'm so okay. I haven't had good news in so long I forgot what it does to a person." Lily climbed onto the bed beside her mother. "Does this mean we get to stay in the house?" she asked. "We get to stay in a renovated version of it," Jonathan said, crouching down to her eye level, "with real walls and real electricity and a real bed, not just a mattress on the floor. And your mom gets a job helping other families who are going through what you went through, so they don't have to do it alone either." Lily considered this with the gravity of a 6-year-old processing something important. "Like a superhero job," she said finally. "Something like that," Jonathan said, and this time he did smile. Fully, the first unguarded smile he could remember giving anyone in a long time that had nothing to do with closing a deal. 6 months later, on a bright Saturday morning in October, the house on Crest Hill Avenue had a ribbon stretched across its newly painted front porch, the third step finally repaired, the oak tree trimmed back, but still standing, the boarded windows replaced with real glass that caught the morning light the way. Jonathan remembered it catching it 30 years ago. A small crowd had gathered on the lawn. 3 other families who had already moved into the new units, college workforce program staff, a local news crew that Bradley had reluctantly agreed was actually good for business this time. Sarah stood near the porch in a blazer that still looked slightly unfamiliar on her, the property manager badge on her lapel reading Sarah Mitchell, Resident Services Coordinator. She had finished her first semester back at the community college in September, 3 classes toward finishing the degree she'd left unfinished 6 years earlier, and she had a job that did not disappear when a warehouse cut its night shift. Lily stood beside her in a yellow dress, the stuffed rabbit, now slightly more battered, but still present, tucked under one arm, watching the small crowd with the open curiosity of a child who finally felt steady enough to be curious about things instead of careful about them. Jonathan stood near the back of the small gathering, not at the front, not making a speech, which had been his explicit instruction to Bradley's PR team. This was not his story to center. When Sarah caught his eye across the lawn, she smiled and he smiled back, and neither of them needed to say anything else about it. The ribbon was cut. The small crowd clapped. Lily ran up the newly repaired front steps 2 at a time, laughing, the stuffed rabbit bouncing against her side, and disappeared through the front door into the house that had once held a different child running up those same steps 31 years earlier, before everything had gone wrong, before everything had eventually, slowly, found its way toward right again. Jonathan stood on the sidewalk where he had first stopped his car 6 months earlier and watched the door close behind her. He thought about his mother at the kitchen table in her work uniform. He thought about the spreadsheet version of himself, who had signed off on Parcel 14 without ever once driving past it. He thought about how easy it had been, for 20 years, to build something enormous and still somehow miss the one thing it was supposed to be for. He did not think he had fixed everything. He knew he hadn't. There were thousands of families like Sarah still out there, still carrying mattresses down sidewalks alone, still falling through gaps in systems that were never built wide enough to catch them. One house, one program, one Thursday board vote. It was not enough, and he knew it was not enough. And he had already started looking at what the next 10 parcels in his portfolio could become if he was willing to ask the same hard question every single time instead of just this once. But it was a start, and starts mattered. If this story moved something in you, drop a comment below and tell me, would you have stopped your car for a stranger carrying a mattress alone, or kept driving like most of us do every single day? I want to hear your honest answer. Hit that like button, subscribe because a brand new story arrives every single week, and I will see you in the next one.